Oak. The Atchafalaya River did not care about grief. Oak. It rose in the November dark the same way it always had, indifferent and black, swallowing the low cypress roots and licking at the warped planks of the dock where Lenora Pruitt knelt in the mud, packing the last of what she owned into a canvas sack that had once belonged to her husband. 3 weeks. That was how long it had been since they buried Daniel in the churchyard at Brough Bridge. Oak. 3 weeks since Aldous Vrain, the man who controlled every cotton factor and river transport contract between Lafayette and Baton Rouge, had appeared at her door with 2 lawyers and a ledger she had never seen before. The ledger claimed Daniel owed Vrain's trading company $460 in outstanding credit, a sum so large it might as well have been the moon. Oak. With the parish judge on Vrain's payroll, and no male relative to speak on her behalf, Lenora had been given 48 hours to vacate the house Daniel had built with his own hands before their daughter was born. Oak. Ivy was 6 years old. She did not fully understand why they were leaving. She understood only that her father was gone, and that her mother had stopped crying, which frightened her more than the crying had. Oak. Lenora's son, Owen, was 9. He understood more than he should have. He had stood in the yard and watched Vrain's men carry out the furniture with the still, hard face of a boy, trying very badly to be something he was not yet old enough to be. Oak. Now, in the dark and the rising damp of an unseasonably cold Louisiana November, the 3 of them had nowhere left to go. The Atchafalaya Basin stretched in every direction, a maze of black water, floating marsh grass, and cypress forest so dense and so ancient that it swallowed Sound whole. Lenora had grown up on its edges. She knew enough to be afraid of it at night. Oak. She knew enough to know that without shelter before the temperature dropped further, Ivy's shallow, rattling cough, the one that had started 2 days ago, would not improve. Oak. "Mama," Ivy whispered from inside the rotting pirogue Lenora had dragged from the bank. The child was huddled beneath Daniel's old canvas duster, her small face barely visible in the moonless dark. "I'm cold." Oak. "I know, baby," Lenora said, "just a little longer." Oak. It was a lie. She had nothing. No fire. No destination. The nearest town was 6 miles of flooded road in the wrong direction, and Vrain's men had been following them since yesterday afternoon. She had seen the lantern light moving through the tree line, keeping pace. They weren't trying to hide anymore. Oak. Owen crouched at the bow of the pirogue, his jaw set, holding the iron-headed cane pole Daniel had kept for pushing through shallow water. He was watching the dark the way his father used to watch the weather. Quiet, calculating, not yet afraid. Oak. "There's something out there," Owen said softly. Oak. Lenora heard it a half-second after he spoke. A low, rhythmic sound beneath the water's surface movement. Not a gator. She knew that sound. This was different. Oars. A flat-bottomed vessel cutting through the black water with the quiet precision of someone who did not want to be heard but knew these channels well enough to move without light. Oak. Lenora grabbed Ivy and pulled her close, pressing one finger to her lips. She reached for the only thing she had left that resembled a weapon, a short-handled hatchet Daniel had used for splitting kindling. She held it at her side and did not breathe. Oak. The vessel materialized out of the dark like something that had always been there. A wide, low bateau, heavy with furs and river equipment, pulled by a single figure, so large he seemed to alter the proportions of the water around him. He wore oilcloth over heavy wool and a wide-brimmed hat dark with river water. He came around the edge of the cypress stand and stopped. Oak. He saw her immediately. Oak. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Oak. The man was perhaps 40, though the river aged a person, and he might have been less. His face was heavily bearded, the color of river mud, and his eyes, visible even in the dark, were a pale, unsettling amber that caught what little light existed and held it. He looked at Lenora. He looked at the hatchet. He looked at the 2 children. His expression did not change in the way most men's expressions changed when they encountered something unexpected. Oak. He simply took it in the way a man takes in weather. Oak. "You're Pruitt's wife," he said. It was not a question. His voice was low and flat as the water, with the particular cadence of a man who spent most of his time not speaking. Oak. Lenora's grip on the hatchet tightened. "Who's asking?" Oak. "Name's Cutterhane," the man said. He rested the pole across his knees and made no move toward her. "I ran timber and trap lines through this basin for 12 years. I knew your husband. Not well enough." Oak. "He never mentioned you." Oak. "No reason he would have." Hayne looked past her at the tree line. at the lantern light that had appeared again between the bald cypresses a quarter mile to the east. He looked at it for a moment with an expression Lenora could not read. Those Vrain's men? Oak. The blood went cold in her chest. You work for him? Oak. No. The word came out flat and final as a door closing. I don't work for Vrain. I don't work for anyone. He looked at Ivy, who had pressed her face into Lenora's side, and then at Owen, who had not lowered the cane pole. That child is sick. Oak. She's fine. Oak. Haynes said nothing. He looked at the lantern light again. The distance between it and them was closing. Oak. Mrs. Pruitt, he said quietly, I have a camp. 40 minutes up the North Channel, off the main basin. They won't find it. They don't know those channels. He picked up his pole. You can come or you can stay here. But if you stay here, those men find you before morning, and then it's not your house Vrain takes. Oak. Lenora looked at her daughter, whose lips were pale, whose breathing had the wet, reluctant quality of lungs working harder than they should. She looked at Owen, who was looking at her, waiting for her to decide, trusting her to decide correctly. Oak. She lowered the hatchet. Oak. If you touch my children, she said, her voice steady in a way her hands were not, I will put this in your skull. Oak. Cutter Hayne looked at her with those amber eyes, and something moved behind them. Not amusement, not offense, something older than either. Oak. Fair enough, he said. Oak. The North Channel was exactly as he described. Narrow, overhung with Spanish moss so thick it blotted the sky entirely, the water barely a foot deep in places, and moving so slowly it might have been standing still. Hayne pulled through it without hesitation, without a light, reading the water the way Lenora read text. Sat at the stern and watched every move the man made. Oak. Ivy had fallen asleep against Lenora's shoulder, her breathing audible, her small body radiating a heat that was not warmth but fever. Oak. The camp was not what Lenora expected. Oak. It was built on a natural hummock, a rise of solid ground in the middle of the swamp that shouldn't have existed but did, the way certain things in the basin existed by their own logic. The structure was part cabin and part something else. Heavy cypress posts sunk deep, walls of split timber sealed with river clay, a roof of thatched palmetto over tin. It was low and dark from the outside. Oak. Inside, a cast-iron stove put out a heat so immediate and so absolute that Ivy stirred and made a soft, involuntary sound of relief the moment they crossed the threshold. Oak. The interior was spare, a workbench, a rope bed, hides stretched on frames, cast-iron pots, shelves of dried herbs, sealed jars, river equipment, no excess. Every object had a function. Oak. Hayne moved directly to the stove, banking it higher. He produced blankets, heavy, rough wool, smelling of camphor and cedar, and handed them to Lenora without comment. He filled a tin pot with water from a covered barrel and set it on the stove. From the shelf, he took down a jar of dried herbs that Lenora did not recognize, and another of what appeared to be willow bark. Oak. Lay her by the stove, he said, gesturing to Ivy. Oak. What is that? Oak. Horehound and willow bark, for the chest, the fever. He looked at her steadily. I'm not poisoning a child, Mrs. Pruitt. Oak. Lenora laid Ivy down on the blanket nearest the stove. The little girl curled immediately toward the heat, her fingers relaxing in a way they hadn't in days. Owen sat beside his sister, cross-legged, the cane pole across his lap. Hayne glanced at the boy, at the pole, at the posture, and said nothing about it. He simply put a second cup of the herbed broth together and set it near Owen without being asked. Oak. Owen looked at it, looked at Hayne, looked at his mother. Oak. Lenora gave the smallest nod. Oak. Owen picked up the cup. Oak. She watched Hayne kneel beside Ivy, the enormous man moving with a careful, deliberate gentleness as he lifted the child's head and spooned the warm liquid into her mouth a little at a time. He did not speak to Ivy. He did not talk at children the way men who were unused to them talked. Too loud, too broad, too desperate for a response. He simply gave her the medicine and let her sleep. Oak. You have children, Lenora said. Oak. The spoon stopped for one fraction of a second. Oak. Had, Hayne said. He did not look up. Oak. The fire cracked in the stove. Outside, the swamp moved around them, the water and the insects and the night birds forming a sound so constant it became a kind of silence. Oak. I'm sorry, Lenora said. Oak. Hayne looked up then, briefly. Your husband was a good man, he said, instead of accepting the condolence. He helped me with a skiff repair winter before last. Didn't charge me. Didn't make a thing of it. He looked back at Ivy. I heard what Vrain did. Oak. Everyone heard, Lenora said, the bitterness sharp in her throat, and no one did anything. Oak. No. Haynes set the cup down. That's how Vrain works. He makes it so the cost of acting is too high for any one person alone. He sat back on his heels. But he made a mistake with your husband. Oak. Lenora went still. What kind of mistake? Oak. Haynes stood, crossed to the workbench, and opened a flat cedar box fixed with a simple iron latch. He took something out and brought it to her. Oak. It was a glass vial, sealed with wax, half filled with a dark, yellowish powder. Lenora had never seen it before, but the tag tied around it with a piece of twine was written in a hand she would have known anywhere. Small, slightly leftward leaning. The letters pressed hard into the paper the way Daniel always pressed when he was writing something he meant to remember. Oak. For the record, do not let Vrain have this, DP. Oak. Lenora's hand was shaking before she fully understood what she was holding. Oak. I found it 4 days ago, Haynes said quietly. At the edge of the basin, near the old Doucette landing. In a tin box buried under the roots of a cypress, marked with a cut I recognized as a trapper's cash mark. Your husband must have learned it from someone. He paused. There was a note with it. The note is gone. It was wet. It came apart when I opened the box. But the vial survived. Oak. What is it? Oak. Mineral dye. Specific formulation used in the cotton sampling process. Haynes sat down across from her, his big hands loose on his knees. Your husband wasn't just a boat builder, Mrs. Pruitt. He had been documenting Vrain's weighing operations for 8 months. Vrain has been rigging the scales at every cotton factor between here and Baton Rouge, shorting the weights, stealing from 100 small growers who had no way to prove it. Oak. Your husband was collecting physical evidence to bring to the Federal Trade Commission in New Orleans. He looked at her steadily. Vrain found out. The debt in that ledger is not a debt. It's a silencing. Oak. The room was very quiet. Oak. Daniel was going to expose him, Lenora said. The words came out slow, like something she was figuring out as she said it. Oak. Yes. Oak. And Vrain had him killed. Oak. Haynes did not flinch from it. I believe so, yes. Oak. Lenora sat with that for a moment that felt much longer than it was. The grief was still there. It would always be there, but it shifted now, rearranged itself into something with harder edges. Something she could hold on to. Oak. Then I need to finish what he started, she said. Oak. Haynes looked at her, not with skepticism, not with the particular brand of condescension that men generally deployed when women said things like that. He looked at her the way he had looked at the lantern light in the tree line. Taking it in, measuring it, deciding what it meant. Oak. You'd have to get to New Orleans, he said. Past Vrain's people, he has men on every road south. Oak. Can you get us out through the basin? Oak. I can get you to the river. Getting upriver to the city is the harder part. Oak. One thing at a time, Lenora said. Oak. For the first time since she had seen him materialize out of the black water, Cutter Haynes almost smiled. It was brief, barely there. A shift at one corner of his mouth before the river flatness returned. But Owen saw it. Lenora saw Owen see it, and saw something relax, incrementally, in her son's shoulders. Oak. She didn't sleep much that first night. She sat near the stove and watched Ivy breathe and thought about Daniel pressing a glass vial into the roots of a cypress tree and marking it with a trapper's sign he must have learned in passing, from some stranger along the water, because he had known he was running out of time and had done what he could with what he had. Oak. By morning, Ivy's fever had broken. The child sat up in the blanket, blinking at the unfamiliar ceiling, and said, with the extraordinary practicality of 6-year-olds, "Is that man going to feed us breakfast?" Oak. Haynes, who was at the workbench, turned around. He looked at Ivy for a moment. Then he turned back to the workbench and began slicing smoked meat without comment. Oak. Owen, who had slept sitting up with his back to the wall and the cane pole beside him, looked at Haynes' back and then at his sister. Oak. Yeah, Owen said. I think he is. Oak. They stayed 3 days. Oak. The basin turned cold the second day, a genuine cold, the kind that came down from the north and sat on the water like a lid. Haynes kept the stove going without being asked. He showed Owen how to check the lines he had set along the hummock's edge for catfish, walking the boy through each step with the particular patience of a man who understood that a 9-year-old's attention was a thing to be respected, not demanded. Oak. He let Ivy follow him when he gathered dry wood from the lean-to, carrying one stick at a time in her small arms with the grave self-importance of someone performing an essential task. Oak. Lenora watched it happen with a complicated feeling she had no clean name for. She had spent the past 3 weeks hardening herself against every stranger, every offered hand, every word that might be a trap dressed up as kindness. And here was a man who looked like something out of the deepest part of the swamp, moving around her children with a quietness so careful it was almost tender. Oak. The children had decided about him before she had. That was the thing she kept returning to. Oak. On the second evening, when the children were asleep, she sat across from Hayne at the small table, while he repaired a section of fish trap with wire and river-stained hands. Oak. How long have you been out here alone? She asked. Oak. He didn't pause in his work. 8 years. Oak. Why? Oak. The wire moved through the frame, in, around, pull tight. Oak. I had a family, he said. Down near Thibodeau, my wife. A son. He did not embellish this. He let the sentence sit exactly as long as it needed to. Vrain's father ran the timber contracts in that parish. When I wouldn't sell him the strip of land our house sat on, he went to the bank. Had our credit pulled overnight. We lost the house in the foreclosure. A pause. My wife tried to take the boy to her sister's place in Huma. The road flooded. Bad crossing. A wheel gave out. Oak. He stopped. Oak. I'm sorry, Lenora said. The words felt inadequate, and she didn't try to make them more. Oak. Vrain's father died years ago, Hayne said. Left everything to the son. The son is the same man wearing a cleaner shirt. He looked up from the trap. His amber eyes in the lamplight were steady and very tired. I came out here because it was the only place I could put enough distance between myself and what I wanted to do that I wouldn't do it wrong. Oak. Lenora was quiet for a moment, and now? Oak. Now, Hayne said slowly, I think I've been using the basin as an excuse. He looked back down at the trap. There's a federal trade commissioner in New Orleans, name of Ardell Foss. He's honest, one of about 4 honest men in Louisiana, but he's one of them. If your husband's evidence reaches Foss, Vrain doesn't just lose this. He faces federal charges, the kind you don't buy your way out of. Oak. You knew about this already, before you found the vial. Oak. Hayne said nothing for a moment. I've been watching Vrain for 3 years, from out here, collecting what I could. He set the trap down. Your husband and I were working toward the same thing without knowing the other existed. Oak. The fire moved in the stove. Outside, something moved through the water. Something heavy, something unhurried. Oak. Then we finish it together, Lenora said. Oak. Hayne looked at her. He did not argue with it. He simply nodded once and picked up the trap again. Oak. They left on the 4th morning, before the light fully arrived, when the basin was still gray and the herons were just beginning to move. Hayne's bateau sat low in the water with the 4 of them and his equipment, but he pulled it with an ease that made the weight seem irrelevant. Oak. He took channels Lenora didn't know existed, cuts so narrow the cypress knees brushed both sides of the vessel, backwater routes that added distance but avoided every road crossing where Vrain's men might be watching. Oak. They were 2 hours out when Owen said quietly, There's a boat behind us. Oak. Hayne didn't turn. How far? Oak. 3 bends. Oak. How many men? Oak. Owen watched 2, maybe 3, moving fast. Oak. Hayne's jaw set.
He didn't speed up.
Speeding up would burn energy he needed and wouldn't open the gaps significantly in the channels they were in. Instead, he turned the bateau into a cut so narrow Lenora would not have seen it as a passage at all, just a darkness between 2 trees. They slid through it into a pocket of still water entirely enclosed by cypress, invisible from the main channel, the Spanish moss dropping like a curtain behind them. Oak. He pushed them back against the roots and held the boat there with one hand on a trunk and did not move. Oak. They could hear the other boat. The sound of it moved past. Oar strokes, quick and purposeful, 2 men's breathing, a murmured exchange she couldn't make out. It passed. It kept going. The sound faded into the ordinary noise of the basin. Oak. Ivy had not made a sound. She was watching Hayne's face with the focused attention of a child who has learned, by necessity, to read the faces of adults for information about whether to be afraid. She read something in his face. The stillness, the absolute calm, and she did not move, and she did not cry. Oak. When the sound of the other boat was fully gone, Hayne looked down at her. Oak. Good girl, he said, quiet as water. Oak. Ivy regarded him solemnly. Then she held out the small stick she'd been clutching since they left the hummock, a piece of cypress she'd been carrying like a talisman, and offered it to him. He looked at it. He took it, carefully, and put it in the pocket of his oilcloth jacket. Oak. Lenora looked away so he wouldn't see her face. Oak. The river port of Plaquemine sat at the junction of the Atchafalaya and a navigable stretch of the Mississippi Corridor, a working waterfront of cotton warehouses and flat-bottomed steamers and men who asked no questions if the fare was paid. Hayne had a contact there, a river pilot named Gustave, who owed him a debt of the undiscussed but binding variety, and by midday they were aboard a working freight steamer heading upriver to New Orleans, tucked into a small cabin that smelled of tar and river silt and the particular staleness of spaces used for sleeping by people who are always briefly somewhere. Vrain had men in Plaquemine. 2 of them were on the waterfront when Hayne walked Lenora and the children aboard. He had seen them. He had said nothing, positioned himself so that his body blocked their sightline to Lenora until they were below deck, and then stood at the rail while the boat pulled out of dock with the unhurried river stillness of a man who had nowhere particular to be. The men on the dock watched the steamer go. They did not follow. It took 3 days to reach New Orleans. They were 3 strange days, suspended from ordinary life, rocking on the great brown river, the children adapting to the situation with the radical pragmatism of the young. Owen spent most of his time at the rail, watching the river traffic. Ivy commandeered a corner of their shared cabin and arranged her small collection of objects. The cypress stick, a river stone she'd picked up on the hummock, a brass button she'd found in the blanket, with the systematic intentionality of someone establishing a home. Hayne, for his part, moved through the 3 days as he moved through most things, quietly at the margins, useful when usefulness was needed. He fixed a sticking latch on their cabin door. He found where the cook kept the extra biscuits, and made sure Owen knew about it. On the second night, when the river got rough and Ivy could not sleep, he sat outside the cabin door and talked, low, steady, a flat recounting of the animals he'd seen in the basin over the years, no embellishment, no drama, just the particular companionable weight of a voice in the dark, until she went quiet. Lenora heard it through the cabin wall. She lay in the narrow bunk and listened to his voice, and thought about Daniel, who had been a good man and a gentle one, and who had done something brave entirely alone, because he had not known there was anyone else. She thought about what it cost a person to be alone with something like that for 8 years. She thought about the cypress stick in Hayne's pocket. She did not yet know what she felt. She knew only that the feeling was there, and that it was not a simple one, and that she was not ready to look at it directly. Federal Trade Commissioner Ardell Foss kept an office on Magazine Street. 3 rooms above a printing shop, modest for a federal appointment, which was itself a reasonable indicator of character. He was a lean, bespectacled man in his 50s, who looked like someone who had made a career out of being underestimated, and he received them on a Tuesday morning with the brisk attention of a man who had learned to tell the difference between nuisance and evidence in approximately 30 seconds. The vial took less than that. Hayne set it on Foss's desk alongside the documentation he had accumulated over 3 years, shipping records, weighing station logs, affidavits from 2 growers who had agreed to sign their names, and Lenora set down the fragment of Daniel's journal that she had carried out of the basin in her coat pocket, the pages that referenced dates and quantities and the name Vrain, across 8 months of careful notation. Foss read. He did not speak for a long time. When he looked up, he looked at Lenora first, and then at Hayne. This is substantial, he said. Yes, Hayne said. I'll need a week to verify the mineral compound against Vrain's factory records. You'll find it matches. Foss removed his glasses and cleaned them with his handkerchief, in the deliberate manner of a man organizing his thinking. Mrs. Pruitt, he said, I want to be direct with you. Pursuing this will take time. Vrain will fight it. He has lawyers that cost more per day than this office's monthly operating budget. I know, Lenora said. You understand what I'm telling you. I understand that men like Vrain count on people like me deciding the fight isn't worth it. She held his gaze. My husband decided it was worth it, so do I. Foss looked at her for a moment. Then he put his glasses back on and pulled a fresh sheet toward him. Then let's begin, he said. Aldous Vrain was arrested 6 weeks later at his office in Lafayette by 2 federal marshals and a deputy who had been waiting for a reason to make that walk for the better part of 3 years. The charges were federal fraud, commercial deception, and 1 count of conspiracy in connection with the death of Daniel Pruitt, the last brought on the strength of 2 witnesses whose testimony Foss's office had spent 5 weeks quietly securing. Oak. Lenora was not there when it happened. She heard about it from Hain, who had heard it from Gustave, who had been on the Lafayette waterfront that morning for unrelated reasons, and had watched the whole proceeding with the deep satisfaction of a man watching something go correctly for once. Oak. She was sitting on the steps of the boarding house in New Orleans, where Foss's office had arranged temporary lodging. Hain sat beside her on the step, a cup of coffee in his large hands, watching the street. Oak. It's done, he said. Oak. Lenora was quiet for a long moment. The November light on Magazine Street was thin and yellow, the kind of light that made everything look like it was just arriving at its own existence. Oak. Not done, she said finally. Just started. Oak. Hain turned his head to look at her. Oak. I'm not going back to Bro Bridge, she said. That house? I don't want it back, even if I could get it. Too many? She stopped, started again. Daniel deserves to be remembered somewhere he was happy. We were happy, in the early years before Vrain, before all of it. She looked down at her hands. I want to build something he would have recognized, something the kids can grow up in, something that isn't Vrain's shadow. Oak. Hain was quiet for long enough that she looked at him. Oak. The upper basin, he said slowly. Above the main channel toward the Teche, there's high ground there, real ground, not hummock. Good soil. Far enough out that a person who knew the waterways could get in and out, but invisible enough that the wrong kind of attention doesn't find you easily. Oak. You know the land. Oak. I know every inch of it. Oak. Lenora held his gaze. Then come show it to us. Oak. He looked at her for a long time with those amber eyes, and she let him look. She had said what she meant, and she meant what she had said, and she was done hedging things that didn't require hedging. Oak. From inside the boarding house, she could hear Owen explaining something at length to Ivy, the older sibling authority in his voice, already slipping toward the easy register of a boy who had slept well and eaten enough, and was not, for the first time in weeks, afraid. And under his voice, Ivy's laughter, sudden and unguarded, the kind that a child produces when nothing in the world is requiring them to be careful. Oak. Hain heard it too. She saw it move across his face. The thing he had been carrying for 8 years, loosening its grip just slightly, just enough. Oak. He reached into the pocket of his oilcloth jacket. He took out the small cypress stick and turned it once in his fingers. Oak. All right, he said quietly. Let's go home. Oak. What stays with me most about Lenora's story isn't the moment she was saved. It's the moment she decided. Standing in the mud at the edge of the Atchafalaya with a hatchet in her hand and a sick child behind her, that she was not going to wait for someone else to fix what had been done to her family. That decision, made in the dark with no certainty of anything, is the thread everything else follows from. Oak. I think about the way consequences actually work in a life. Not the way we sometimes wish they did, swift, obvious, satisfying, but the way they really do, slowly and sideways. Aldous Vrain spent years building a system where the cost of standing up to him was simply too high for any one person to bear alone, and for a long time that system worked, because he understood that isolated people are easier to silence than connected ones. Oak. What he didn't account for was a woman who kept moving even when she had every reason to stop, and a man in the swamp who had been watching and waiting and collecting pieces of the same truth for 8 years. Oak. The thing Vrain built to protect himself became exactly the thing that destroyed him, because he kept adding to it, kept pushing, until he pushed someone who connected to someone else, who connected to a federal commissioner with 4 honest square feet of office space and the patience to see it through. That's how it actually works, not lightning from the sky, just the long, stubborn wait of right people finding each other. Oak. Cutter Hain is the part of this story I keep coming back to. He had every justification to stay in that basin forever. He had been genuinely wronged, genuinely abandoned by every system that was supposed to protect him. And for 8 years, he called that self-preservation. I understand the impulse completely. When the world breaks something in you that badly, distance feels like the only sane response. Oak. But there's a difference between protecting yourself and disappearing, and Hain knew it, even if he'd stopped admitting it. The moment he saw Lenora on that bank, saw Owen with his cane pole and his 9-year-old Gravity, saw Ivy's pale face, something in him recognized that his isolation had stopped being a wound and started being a choice. And the remarkable thing isn't that he's helped them. It's that he let them help him. That's the harder direction. Receiving matters too. Oak. What Daniel Pruitt left behind in that glass vial sealed with wax. The months of quiet, careful, unglamorous documentation. That's the part that doesn't get talked about enough. He wasn't a man with resources or connections. He was a boat builder who noticed something wrong and decided that noticing wasn't enough. He taught himself what he needed to learn, found where to look, figured out how to preserve what he found. That kind of intelligence isn't about formal education. It's about paying attention and then doing something with what you see, even when you can't yet see how it ends. The three of them. Lenora's refusal to stop moving, Haynes' decision to stop hiding, Daniel's choice to document the truth even alone. None of it would have been enough on its own. But together, each piece finds the one it was missing. I don't think that's accidental. I think the quality of a person's choices over time is the most honest thing about them. And that quality has a way of finding its match, sooner or later, in the dark or in the daylight, on a swamp bank, or in a federal office on Magazine Street. That cypress stick Ivy handed Hayne, one small piece of wood, carried by a 6-year-old as a talisman, and the fact that he put it in his pocket and kept it there, tells you everything about where that story was always headed.